Once you understand that the Israel lobby greatly influences our Middle East policy, it becomes easy to understand that this same influence can also be wielded towards goals in media, academia, and social issues in America. Starting with education, the main goal of the Israel lobby in education is to cultivate sympathy among American students from the time they are children going through the educational system. Professor and political scientist Norman Finkelstein notes, quote, "Many more undergraduates are able to place the Nazi Holocaust in the right century and generally cite the number killed, as compared to the American Civil War, and that more Americans can identify the Holocaust than Pearl Harbor or the atomic bombing of Japan. Everyone knows that the Holocaust was the event where Nazis killed 6 million Jews. But what about other important events to American history? How many Americans know the death count of the Civil War or Vietnam? Is there any other war in history that the average American can cite the death count of? Or is it just Jews in World War II? What's even stranger is that it wasn't always this way. In fact, in the 50s and 60s, immediately after the war had ended, Americans and even Jews were not so occupied with the Holocaust and Israel as they are today. Membership of the Zionist Organization of America dropped from 1948 to 1967 by 90%. And in 1967, only 1 in 20 Jews reported wanting to visit Israel. Additionally, there was only one university course dedicated to the Holocaust in the United States. It was after the 1967 war, when the United States began building its strong alliance with Israel, that things started to change. It wasn't just the US military or government that became interested in Israel, but American Jews as well. In the words of political commentator Norman Poderitz, the state of Israel became, quote, "the religion of the Jews" after 1967. The effort to convert the average American into a Zionist began. While in the 60s, there were only 2 research books available in English and 4 major motion pictures released about the Holocaust, in the 90s, there were 108 books published and 16 movies about the Holocaust. While it seems that the Holocaust may be the historical event which Americans receive the most education and propaganda about, it's never enough. As of the time of writing this script, President Donald Trump revoked $400 million of federal funding from Columbia University for anti-Semitism. During the Israel and Palestine protests in 2024, NYU made Zionist a protected class for academic purposes. Isn't it curious that for decades, white students had been discriminated against in college admissions and for scholarships, and nothing changes? But the moment anti-Israel sentiment becomes popular, the universities go into overdrive to squash it. In fact, this wouldn't be the only time that there was selective consideration of racial grievances by Jewish Americans. During the Civil Rights Movement, Jewish people were largely in support of Black Americans fighting for racial equality. But once the Civil Rights Movement started addressing class or wealth inequality, their support for the movement halted. Jonathan Kaufman reports, quote, "The goals of the Civil Rights Movement were shifting from demands for political and legal equality to demands for economic equality." Cheryl Greenberg said, quote, "When the Civil Rights Movement moved north into the neighborhood of liberal Jews, the question of integration took on a different tone. With concerns now couched in class rather than racial terms, Jews fled to the suburbs almost as quickly as white Christians." This was on full display in 1968 during a New York City teachers' strike, which was suppressed by allegations of anti-Semitism from the largely Jewish academic officials. Israel also has a very concerning level of influence on American law enforcement. For example, in 2007, a memorandum of understanding was signed between U.S. Director of Homeland Security Michael Chertoff and Israeli Minister Avi Ditcher to formalize training agreements for law enforcement. 45,000 law enforcement officials have been trained through the ADL's Law Enforcement and Society program, which is now a required curriculum for all new FBI special agents. The New York Police Department borrowed IDF tactics when monitoring Muslim diasporas in the name of anti-terrorism efforts. Washington, D.C.'s Chief of Police, Kathy Lanier, in 2009 said, quote, "No experience in my life has had more of an impact on doing my job than going to Israel." Is that a good thing? Do we really want the people throwing US citizens in jail to be greatly impacted by Israel? In the 1950s, the US funded law enforcement in other countries to combat communism. That is, protect our ideological and political interests. So why does Israel fund ours? Just like with education, many of the public's understanding of Israel is skewed because of the media, which is largely pro-Israel. This is especially easy to see when comparing to other countries. In 2016, an international poll was done asking citizens of different countries whether Israel occupied Palestinian land or Palestinians occupied Israeli land. To no one's surprise, the United States was the only country where the most selected answer was B. Palestinians occupied Israeli territory, a statement that 49% of Americans agreed with. A Pew Research poll in 2003 found that in 20 out of 21 countries surveyed, either a majority or plurality of the population believes that U.S. Middle East policy favors Israel too much. Even Israelis agreed. An analysis done by Eric Alterman in 2002 found that he could identify 56 columnists and commentators who can be counted on to support Israel reflexively and without qualification. Conversely, Alterman identified only 5 pundits who consistently criticize Israeli behavior or endorse pro-Arab positions. An analysis done by The Intercept in 2024 found that while the number of Palestinian deaths increase, the mention of Palestinians in news articles decrease. This may suggest that while the news is happy to report on unflattering actions by Palestinians, when Palestinians are overwhelmingly victims in the conflict, they don't want to focus on that. Being fed Israeli propaganda is a big deal because it seriously distorts what people believe about the major players in the region. In 2014, 59% of Americans believed that Iran was in possession of nuclear weapons, despite the fact that there is no evidence of this, and Iran has said on numerous occasions that stockpiling nuclear weapons is a violation of Islam. It is now 2025, and Republicans are still saying that Iran is close to having nuclear weapons. How many times are Americans going to fall for the weapons of mass destruction lie? I could go on forever, but the point is this. If you want to understand why powerful people make the decisions they do, you need to understand what is influencing those decisions. And the fact is that the Israel lobby in America has tremendous influence. So if there's any advice I would give to someone who seeks to identify the effects of influence in the future, it is this: be skeptical. When Ben Shapiro says that his loyalty to America is conditional based on Israel, be skeptical.
I think to think that that's why the existence of the State of Israel is the single greatest guarantor of my loyalty to the United States, frankly.
When Donald Trump takes $100 million from Miriam Adelson and then signs an executive order that allows him to deport anti-Israel protesters rather than the 50 million illegal aliens that we voted for him to, be skeptical.
And we're going to make Israel great again.
When Barack Obama angered the Israeli Foreign Ministry and then apologized for it by laying a wreath of flowers on the grave of Theodore Herzl, be skeptical. When all of our presidents, for some reason, make a visit to Israel's Western Wall, be skeptical. And when AIPAC, an organization founded by the son of Theodore Herzl's best friend, becomes the most influential lobbying organization in the country, be